From the boardroom to the shop floor, good business runs on governance. Join esteemed expert on corporate governance, Dr. Nimrod Mbele, Tuesday evenings at 6 p.m. for Beyond Governance, making sense of doing business in South Africa.
A very good evening to all and welcome to tonight's edition of Beyond Governance. My name is Nimrod Mbele. Once again, happy Women's Month. I'm hopeful that every single woman who have shattered the glass ceiling is getting the recognition which they truly believe. We should never underestimate the challenges which women are experiencing, particularly in the corporate space, because they're a minority, truth be told. In the same vein, I'm hopeful that every single woman who has managed to crack the glass ceiling is actually uplifting others as they rise. My anecdote is that it's not every single person who does that. Those that get the opportunity, they tend to join the boys' club and fly solo. But I suppose my anecdote is not really scientific, and therefore there's not really much noise one can make about that. Once again, I'm delighted to be in a company on this glorious Tuesday evening where we're discussing issues of national importance. As you all know, last week a very interesting conversation with Tashmia Ismail, who is the CEO of Yes, and we have learned in that conversation that they've undertook to create job opportunities which runs into 1 million. But sadly, the statistics, born out of that kind of initiatives, are quite disturbing to say the least. But I suppose, on a brighter side, to those people that have those kind of opportunities, their lives will never be the same. So from that point of view, we're quite happy that something has been done. Tonight we're going to continue on this trajectory of economic issues by interviewing yet another powerful woman, very determined, very loving, and I'm sure you're drilling to hear about her. But before you get into the gist of our conversation, allow me to pay homage to my colleagues who kept you informed and hopefully entertained. Benji, thank you very much. DJ Flo, thank you very much for standing in for Tabo. He better be here. Paul, thank you very much. Zlati, and of course, Vusi, who I met on my way out. Moving on swiftly, if you have missed our conversation last week, you know the drill. Quickly go to the website and download our podcast, at www.high.com.ca. And as a norm, I welcome your conversation or your input into our conversation. Our SM line is 345-19195. Our telegram number is 061-895-1019. And I'm also pleased to take your emails. My email address is nimrod@high.co.za. Like I said earlier on, tonight we are talking about, what's the role of business in transformation? In particular, we're putting spotlight on business leadership SA in terms of addressing the quagmire that we're facing. We know that South African employment is currently sitting at 29%. That is when you're using a narrow definition of unemployment, but when you're using a broader definition of employment, we're not comfortable at all. We're sitting at about 39%. And that translates to about 16.3 million of people who are currently employed and about 6.2 million of people who are unemployed. And majority of those people who are unemployed are youth. We really have a serious problem. That is why tonight we've invited one of the, I would imagine, champion of transformation from the Business Leadership SA, and a very powerful woman in my opinion. And I'm sure you'll concur. Her name is Busisiwe Mavuso. And on that note, let me take this opportunity to welcome Busi.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much for honoring our conversation. I might just put this on record that, High Family as a family have extended its gratitude and support to your predecessor, Ndadebona Mahale.
Yes.
And we are obliged to extend a similar kind of gratitude, a similar kind of support to you, for we know that you're not having an easy job.
Absolutely.
But through us as a collective, when we support people in leadership, particularly women, we will grow from strength to strength. Yes. On that note, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Busi, one of the issues that, we talked about even before going to the studio It's the actual role of Business Leadership SA in a context of unemployment that we've seen, and obviously using an NDP, National Development Plan, as a prism. What is the position of Business Leadership SA from that point of view?
Yeah. So, it's a very broad question. Look, I think if you were to look at the aim of the National Development Plan and why you implemented it in the first place as a nation, we were very clear that we wanted to reduce poverty and inequality by 2030, right? I don't know if we had put in the actual reduction percentages that we wanted to achieve, but I think irrespective of what the numbers that may have been put there are, you and I know that we are actually way off the mark when it comes to that one. Poverty in this country is sitting at more than 50%. Inequality, well, we've just overtaken Brazil as the most unequal society in the world. And you've just spoken about unemployment in terms of the broad definition, 39%. You have more people that are unemployed than those that are employed in all the provinces except the Gauteng and the Western Cape. Look, if we were any other country, we should have declared a state of emergency because this is what the situation calls for. I think if you were then supposed to look at this and say, how do we move the country forward? We know at the moment there is this huge dependency on us as the business community to say, what are the interventions that you're going to put in place to ensure that you change the economic trajectory around? And I think we ought to engage with this from a different lens as business, because I think for the longest time, the business of business has just been business, but it cannot be, because business can only prosper in a prosperous society, because if the society is not prosperous, then it gives you problems. There is social instability that is driven by domestic inequality, and it therefore means the environment that you're operating within as a business is not conducive. So it is our problem. If we didn't think it's our problem as business before, we are wrong, right? But then we've realized that is why our strategy, and our positioning and our focus, our first strategic pillar, for instance, at the moment is inclusive socio-economic growth and transformation as Business Leadership South Africa. I think we adopted that because we came to the realization that we cannot continue to be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. It just cannot be. The biggest ticking time bomb that we have in this country is that of inequality. I watched with interest, by the way, I think must have been 2 months back, just after the elections, the Alexander community had crossed the M1 bridge into Sandton, right? And I was coming from a meeting. I think we were stopped there by the police. Obviously, it was a march and guarded by police and whatever the case is. I'm sure I must have stopped for 15 minutes or whatever the case is. Now they're making their time back. I watched with interest and I said to myself, if we as the business community thought that this was just another service delivery protest, then we are wrong. Because if it was a service delivery protest, they could have chosen to take this protest anywhere else. But they chose to bring it to Sandton, the heart of business. Now, if we hadn't set up and listened and paid attention as business, then I don't know what is going to make us to pay attention. So what I'm driving at is that the situation that we find ourselves as a country, in terms of the achievement of the NDP goals, it's not the problem of government. It is a problem of business as well, because therefore we probably have the means better than any of our social partners to can actually, break this quagmire, and bring in the interventions that can move the country forward. So the biggest fundamental flaw, in my view, that we have in this country is the structure of our society. Tell me how we as business are supposed to survive in this environment. You've got 10% that are opulent. You've got 40% that are the middle class. And I think that definition of the middle class is going to have to be looked at, right? Because it is a middle class that is highly indebted and that is a paycheck away from poverty. They lose their job today, their whole life, spirals, right? And then the bottom, which is, more than 50%, it cannot be. Economies that thrive are those that have got a strong middle class, 80% middle class. What, therefore, are we going to do as business to ensure that we change the structure of this society that is actually fundamentally unsustainable? Now, you probably understand the frustration of the 57 million South Africans when they are saying enough and no more. It is precisely because for the past 25 years, they are saying we've been taken for a ride. For the past 25 years, we have managed to create the two economies, one nation. It cannot be. It just doesn't serve South Africa well, because where are our markets supposed to come from as business when you have 50% poverty levels and only 40%? Because it is the middle class that sustains economies, not the rich. So you want the middle class, therefore, to be 80% and more, because that is what a lot of people think, that the business of business is to create jobs. They are wrong. The business of business is to meet an unmet demand. Now, you meet an unmet demand because you've got a target market. But that target market has to have disposable income to can go into your business to buy. If you're sitting with 16 million people that are unemployed, who's supposed to come into our businesses to actually ensure? You know what I'm saying? So it is therefore manifestly within our interest, in my view, as business, to ensure that the structure of the South African society changes. We therefore have to come up with interventions to say, how are we going to deal with youth unemployment? How are we going to deal with black SMMEs? And I'm deliberately saying black, not SMMEs, because I think, let's be honest, until and unless you have touched black in this country, you are not going to move the dial, because they are 80% of the population. So if there isn't going to be a focused intervention on black youth and black SMMEs, then we're actually wasting our time. So I think the long and short of it, I'm answering your question very broadly. We believe in the NDP goals because we know that that is the only way as business we are going to be sustainable. But of course, we probably don't have much to show for it. But the plans are there to ensure that we move the dial forward when it comes to this.
Thank you very much for that, thought-provoking response to my initial question. I just want to pick from what you've alluded to. Yes, there's a greater recognition that South Africa has now overtaken Brazil from inequality point of view, and there's also recognition that we cannot, South Africa cannot prosper until or unless the middle class is bloated sufficiently, because the middle class do generate the demand. But we're not in that position. But here's my question. If there's that greater recognition from business association or business point of view, firstly, is there sufficient consensus amongst business community that, it cannot be business as usual?
You see, I think for me, this is where the government plays a role. This is where government has to come in and ensure that they put policies that are going to move the country forward. I think, let's be honest, the conditions for people to prosper are not God-given. They are created. You have to create a conducive environment for people to prosper. Now, if you are coming in as this ANC-led government trying to solve for this quagmire, where the majority of the South African citizens have been left out of the economic mainstream for time immemorial, your policies therefore have to be very interventionist. They have to be very deliberate. They have to actually be saying, we are going to move this one sector of the population from X to Y, because you know that is how you're going to sustain the country. And I think the affirmative action policy and the BBB policy were points towards that direction. But I think, let's be honest, that the BBB policy has not been broad enough. But also, never mind it not being broad, we know that we as businesses don't comply. The Commission of Employment Equity report came out today, right? And I think the numbers, I've not looked at them properly, but if I'm not mistaken, I think we're sitting at 15% top management representation of black Africans in corporate South Africa. Now, the excuse that we used to give as business before was that we can't hire these people because we can't find them. But now we know we've got stats which are saying that there are more black people entering universities, there are more fast graduating, there are more fast being absorbed into corporate South Africa. So what, therefore, is our excuse now, 25 years into democracy, to be sitting with 15% representation, in top management levels? But you see, we are going to continue to default as business because monitoring and evaluation from a government perspective is not there. So government needs to be driving this from a policy perspective. It cannot be left to the goodwill of people, right? Or to the goodwill of business to say that they are going to effect transformation because, they are going to find it in the goodness of their hearts to do so. Because if you're doing that, you're leaving it to chance. So I think I'm not answering your question directly, but I'm saying that government plays a role when it comes to this one, because you have to channel the country and move it to the direction through policy that you want to achieve. And I'm not saying that let's have policies that are going to be interventionist forever, but I think if we were to enter into this and say for the next 10 years we're going to be Norway did it, in as far as women and gender representation is concerned, and they're the most transformed society today. So why can't we do that? And I think they were very clear that we're going to enter into this, for a number of years, and after 10 years, whatever the case is, we exit, because we can't be talking about transformation forever. It's 25 years. At some point, this discussion is going to be tired, but we continue to talk about it because our people still find themselves, living and confronted with abject poverty day in, day out. And it's just not sustainable.
Absolutely. One of the issues that you brought to attention is the fact that the government's role is to provide an enabling environment through which business can thrive. What is the business take on the current atmosphere surrounding the new administration? When President Ramaphosa came into power, he came through the ticket of the new dawn, transformation, transparency, and all those kinds of good things, which everybody was inspired in when he came through. But the question is, to what extent is business, still respecting all the ethos that brought his administration into being? Is there sufficient confidence in the current administration? I'll tell you why. If there is not sufficient confidence in his administration, which means we're not going to really dent the needle. We're not going to really change the current atmosphere. So it's quite important because everything builds on trust. If we don't trust you, if I don't trust you, if I'm going to second guess you all the time, that leave quite a serious dent in as far as all the plans of it. So I would be quite interested to see what is this negative energy that we've picked up in the media. To what extent has it dampened the investor confidence or the general mood of business, or it is just one of those things that will come and by?
Yeah. Look, I think the political turbulence that you see in the country today undermines confidence. And I think we need to start there. So a strong and united ANC in particular, I'm not going to say government, I'm going to call it, right? A strong and united ANC is actually what we need, at the moment, because that is what is going to move the country forward. So what characterizes the South African economy at the moment, is the notion of uncertainty. And uncertainty is problematic because markets are premised on certainty, and the lack thereof is problematic. So I think we're going to have to be very clear in as far as that is concerned. Do we still believe in Cyril Ramaphosa as a president? Of course we do. We think he's the best man for the job. We think he gets it. We think he's probably our one chance as a country, to move this country forward and achieve what it is that we want to achieve. But what we are frustrated about is the lethargy that you see in the implementation. But you probably maybe have to take that with a pinch of salt, because I think what's happening at the moment with the PP's office is a deliberate attempt to precisely derail the agenda of Cyril Ramaphosa in trying to move this country forward. And it's actually frustrating that the advocate, Busisiwe Mavuso, allows herself to be drawn, in these political shenanigans that are actually currently happening. Because let's be honest, what we are currently facing as a country is the fight back campaign. It is a fight back campaign because we have dared to introduce the structural reforms that are actually going to turn this country around. We have implemented the Zondo Commission, for instance, where all these thieves are going to have to come, and account. And I think with that and with the appointment of the NDPP, we are now moving towards prosecution. And of course, they are going to have to fight for their survival, and that is problematic. So all of this that is currently happening at the moment and that we are confronted with is actually, to ensure that what we want to achieve doesn't happen. And I think that's problematic. So the environment within which we find ourselves as business at the moment, I'm afraid, is not a conducive environment. I think when we took a decision as a country that we actually want to position ourselves as an attractive investment destination, I think we probably should have defined what that means, because there is a certain posture that you need to assume if you're going to define yourself or if you're going to position yourself as an investment destination. So I find ourselves walking right and talking left, and that is problematic. And what I mean is you can't try and position yourself like that and then introduce the prescribed assets, for instance, as a policy, because that is not going to augur well, for business. You can't have an ESCOM that is currently a risk to our sovereign and think that you're going to attract investors, local and foreign, into the country. Because I think the first answer the first conversation you have to have with the investors is that what environment are we coming into? Now, if you can't even provide energy security, which is the fifth factor of production, it is problematic. And I think we're going to have to deal with that. If you're still questioning whether you need to change the mandate of the Reserve Bank or not, it is a problem. If you haven't finalized Section 25, of the Constitution in as far as the land expropriation without compensation is concerned, it is a problem. If you are dilly-dallying around releasing the spectrum, it is a problem. If you haven't finalized the visa issue, it is a problem. So those are all things that I don't know why we are not moving on them. Because that if you're going to get foreign direct investment, for instance, it's going to come with experts, and the experts are going to need the easing of the visa regulation for them to be able to. So So your policy, therefore, has to mimic, that which you're trying to position as a country. But the walking left and talking, right is actually, a fundamental problem. And that is what the biggest frustration is for business. So we're treading very carefully as business because we're playing a wait and see game because we don't know what this environment augurs for us.
Absolutely. I'm quite fascinated by one of the issues that you quite raised is yes, you concede that, Cyril Ramaphosa is the right man for the job. Business is fully behind him. However, the elephant in the room is some of the utterances or the posture which has been taken by Advocate Busisiwe Mavuso. You, from a business point of view, as you have alluded to, that she is derailing transformation. She's derailing the progress which Cyril is trying to put forward by playing political games. So ultimately, what is your end game from PP's point of view as business?
It's simple. She has to go. She has to be removed from that office, not because business says so, but because the courts say so. She's incompetent. She doesn't understand her role. She's actually, I think that is even a more dangerous, she's actually allowing herself to be used by this fight back campaign, which has got the Ace Mahashules and everyone in them. And it's actually for me, this is myopic. It is myopic because I thought it was clear on the 8th of May that we made a contract with the 57 million South Africans that we are actually going to move this economy forward. And the mandate given by South Africans was actually very clear. They gave the ANC government two mandates. They said, we are giving you a mandate to go and heal our fractured society, and we're giving you a mandate to actually salvage our collapsing economy. So, therefore, the interventions and the direction that we're taking this country from a political perspective has to be precisely to try and implement that mandate. So, I don't understand, therefore, don't we understand how close we are to the edge of the precipice? And clearly, for me, it says that we don't. I think we have to agree and maybe submit as South Africans that we lack leadership at the helm, especially in government. This country is devoid of leadership. And I think if we don't realize soon enough that what we are actually doing is self-mutilation and self-destruction, then unfortunately soon we're going to be another failed African state. Remember, we've already been downgraded by S&P and by Fitch. We've got Moody's, who's actually been very lenient to this economy. But I think they are also getting to their wits' end. They are worried that the structural reforms that you have actually implemented as a country, you are not going to be able to achieve them precisely because of the political factionalism. They said, we are worried that CR is not going to be given the space to actually do what he needs to do. And they were right. If anything, our focus at the moment should be if we understand that on the 1st of November, Moody's is announcing their decision and we're moving towards the medium-term budget speech, if anything, all our efforts ought to be on putting our best foot forward. So this that we're actually, obsessed with, as a country about business, having funded the CR17 campaign. It's another form of state capture. Don't get me wrong. If the business funding of the CR17 campaign is illegal, then let Cyril Ramaphosa and my CEOs along with him go to jail for it, right? So we are not defending that as business. So let's look into that. If there's anything amiss that has been done by business by funding that campaign, then let that go and be, discussed at the courts. But let's not deflect the attention from Busisiwe Mavuso. Busisiwe Mavuso has to leave that office. She's the biggest threat that we have as a country in terms of protecting our constitution. And if she was in any other office, maybe we wouldn't be so concerned. But this is the highest office in the land. This is the office that is meant to protect our constitution. So you can't have, someone of her, I don't know how to call it, but she's wrong for that office. Just let me put it that way. She's wrong for that office. She's not supposed to be there. And I was actually happy when I learned today that the DA has actually managed to get the Speaker of Parliament to actually get an inquiry going in terms of removing her from office. Because the longer she stays in that office, then unfortunately the risk that we face as a country, and the uncertainty that continues to be created for the credit rating agencies, for the potential funders, for business, for civil society, for the international community, for the global community is just continuing to grow, and it's not going to end well for South Africa. So the quicker we remove her, I think the better actually for the country. I know. The quicker we remove her, the better it is for the country.
Thank you very much for that input. We're going to take a break, after, obviously going through this very interesting conversation that we're having with Busisiwe Mavuso, who is the CEO of Business Leadership SA. We'll come back in a second. We'll come back on the second installment of the show. It is now 20 minutes to 7 o'clock. I implore you to give us your thoughts on our SMS line, which is 34519. Our telegram is 061-895-1019. And I'm joined in studio by the CEO of Business Leadership SA, Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso, and I've also been joined by Eric Stillerman, who is a regular voice to the show. For those who have just joined us, we're having a conversation with the CEO just to reflect on the role of business in addressing, the serious quagmire that we are experiencing in the country. Before we went to the break, she was, obviously talking about the business view or the business role in relation to the Office of the Public Protector. And the business view is that, she has become an enemy of progress, if I may put it. She needs to move because she is, disturbing the umbilical cord that lays or that is about to bring investment opportunity that we are seeking for. Perhaps maybe we'll taking that conversation a bit further, Busi, is that assuming she goes out, will that address the economic challenges that we see now, or there's yet other deep-rooted structural issues that we need as a country need to go through?
You see, it's going to be a move in the right direction. Remember the reason why we were downgraded by S&P and Fitch in 2017. The biggest factor was the institution weakening, or the weakening of some of the key institutions in this country. So if you have someone like that in that office, she's a threat to this democracy. Because what she's doing now, to the point that I alluded to earlier on, she's allowing herself to be used, by the Fight Back campaign to can actually derail the course that we're on as a country. Because this is very simple, keep these ones that are progressive, somehow, mired in these legal battles, so that therefore their attention can deflect from what is actually happening, and for whatever reason, CR and the PG have actually been targeted. PG is very easy. PG has come into the SOEs and is very clear in terms of the agenda of turning these things around, right? And we know that the state capture project had the SOEs, as their playing ground. That is where the industrial scale looting happened. ESCOM, for instance, should be declared a crime scene scene, because that is where millions of rands were actually looted and hollowed out of the fiscus and out of this country. So if you were to keep those two that are actually going to unearth this truth that is going to get you and I as the thieves who are masquerading as politicians in jail, therefore we have to somehow keep them busy so that they don't get to the bottom of the problem. So it's going to be the step in the right direction. Let's get someone there whose integrity is going to be unquestioned. Because if you are charged with protecting the Constitution, then you can imagine you have to be beyond reproach. And unfortunately, Busisiwe Mavuso is not.
Thank you very much for that insight. Let me bring you in, Eric. We've heard the COO making a very clear and unapologetic position of the movement insofar as getting rid of Busisiwe Mavuso. Your thoughts on that? And before we get to another, critical question, given time.
Thanks so much. Good evening, Busi. Good evening, Nimrod.
Good evening,
it's a pleasure to meet you and to hear that indeed we do have leadership in this country. As I told you in the break, somebody passionate and articulate like yourself representing the business community, the top businesses in the country. And if I may, just move on a little, Nimrod, if you don't mind, just to ask Busi what she thinks business can actually do to turn this economy around and to advance the agenda of growth and inclusive growth, not only of the inclusive part, but of the growth and investment, bearing in mind the issues that you're talking about, and not being able to wait for a whole process until the public protector issues get sorted out, but in the interim to build the confidence of business and the investment community. There's an investment conference happening, I think, on the 4th and 5th of September. What do you think, as the business leadership, business can do to stimulate growth and investment in the economy?
Absolutely. So I think first and foremost, it's going to be, and I think we touched on this earlier on, the environment within which we operate as business has to be conducive, right? Because I think there is the basics that need to be guaranteed by the state if you are going to put in money in the country.
Right.
There has to be energy security. There has to be functional municipalities, because it doesn't help that I pay, and I sat with this case, Eric, with Nestle last year, where they were paying about 1.3 million rands per month to the municipality, but the municipality, which is the most dysfunctional municipality in the country, Malutia Pofong in Harrismith, was not paying that over to Eskom. So what would happen is they were experiencing load shedding of about 12 to 18 hours a day. They've got a factory in Harrismith which employs 400 people, and if you extrapolate those numbers in terms of the mouths that are benefiting from those employees, those are 4,000 lives, that are impacted.
Sure.
Now, Nestle was close to a decision of saying that should we not be closing this factory down and maybe be moving it somewhere else, or better yet, out of the country. Now, you see, if you're dealing with that, remember, we're an open economy, which means that we're not only competing with ourselves, but we're competing with the rest of the world.
Sure.
So when Nestle, as an international company, therefore, has to put their numbers forward as Nestle South Africa, they have to actually look at costs of production and unit cost of production to say how competitive are we, because at the end of the day you have to be making profits as a business. Now, if your unit costs as a South African entity are escalated because of this rigid labor regime which is demanding 11% increases when our economic growth has not touched 2% since 2013, and when you're confronted with 12 to 18 hours of disruptions in production, you know what I'm saying? So the environment has to be conducive, Eric, for me to be able to put my money into the country so I can get the returns that I want to get. So I think that's actually the key issue.
To my mind, sorry to challenge you here, Busi. I think, this so-called conducive environment and the big if, we're going to wait a long time till it all comes right, okay? The question, the point I'm making is, in order to get it right, how can business assist government to get it right, Like I know, for example, they take Eskom, for example. Your chairperson of BLSA, if I'm not mistaken, Busisiwe Mavuso, is also the chairperson and the acting CEO of Eskom. So is he wrestling with that on his own? What is actually going on in Eskom, and what is the role that business leadership and the CEOs and all the expertise that business has can put in place to improve Eskom, to sort out the debt issues at Eskom, to sort out all the SOEs, SAA, SABC. What is it that you can, and including the municipalities? Absolutely. Surely business, instead of just playing the waiting game, Busi, because we'll wait until we all go downhill, we'll be downgraded, there'll be massive exit of capital. You know what I'm talking about. I'm saying, what is the what is Jabu, in fact? Why does Jabu actually not be more articulate in terms of what is the plan of action? For Eskom, and what's your thoughts on that?
I'm glad you went there, Eric, because you see, for me to be able to come in to intervene and assist you, first are going to have to allow me the opportunity to do so. Now, what you're sitting with at Eskom, you're sitting with the board. You're sitting with the presidential task team that has been appointed by CR. You're sitting with the technical review team that has been appointed by PG. You're sitting with the CRO that apparently reports to the finance minister. You're sitting with the interministerial committee that reports to the deputy president of the country. Now, the difficult conversation that we have had to have with the funders, you would remember also at the beginning of the year, I think it was around March, we actually were almost put in a very critical situation as a country where the China Development Bank refused to release the 7 billion that they were supposed to release to Eskom, and we actually had to get the banks, to give us 3.5 billion so that we can meet our obligations as Eskom, because if we hadn't, then you can imagine what that was actually going to do, from
bringing the country to a standstill.
Right? Sure. So I think you're going to have to allow business to actually come in and assist if you actually want the assistance. And I think this is the point, where I'm saying that you can't be walking left and talking right. We still continue to raise our hands as business leadership South Africa to say that we would like to ensure that this sixth administration, this ANC-led government, this CR-led state is a capable state, because we have experienced just how painful it is to deal with a government that is dysfunctional. So I'm just saying business needs to be allowed the space, whether financial resources, human resources, whatever resources to make this country a capable state, allow us the opportunity to do so.
But here's something that you reflected on earlier, which I think summarized the thrust of the challenges as it were. You've said there's leadership. This country is devoid of leadership. We don't have sufficient leadership, because I think you hit it on the nail there. Because all these structures that are in place, don't necessarily provide direction, because they're always competing. There's terms. Each one of them, I bet you, they've got terms of reference for this and that and that and that and that. At what point, these structures provide business leadership and an opportunity to be more decisive? And again, my sense is that the frame of reference in the country, it is more of a consultation, which is paralyzing decision making. When we know what is a problem, what we know the problem, what more do we need? We just need to be decisive, as business, as government. So what is missing from business point, or even from government point of view, to say, yes, this is how you want to address the problem. And here's a plan of action, because we're not devoid of plans. We've got so many plans.
Absolutely.
It's the execution that is missing. And that boils down on leadership that we don't have. So there's no amount of planning that we can do. We can plan until cows come home. It is execution which borders on leadership, and which borders on onboarding and credibility of those leadership. Where are we on that point?
So you see, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is execution, but more importantly, it is lack of decisiveness. So you see, we're going to have to understand that if you are in leadership, you are not going to please everyone. And if you are pleasing everyone, then unfortunately you are not making enough progress. When it comes to the SOEs, who are very clear as business, not all of these 700 odd SOEs are strategic. Can we choose where we want to play in as a country? Because we can't play everywhere. Clearly, we have shown that we are dismal, in the running of entities, because the biggest probably thing that this ANC-led government is going to look back on as probably its greatest achievement, and this is me being sarcastic, is the killing of Eskom and SAA and SABC and Denel and whatever the case is, because that is what is happening. There is no point in trying to salvage that which is salvageable, and this is where the lack of decisiveness and the fear of taking the tough decisions therefore come in. When we gave when we made the 23 billion commitment for the next 10 years to Eskom, I think it was at the SONA address, credit rating agencies, and this was a consensus view, quickly came in and said that we are worried that this is going to erode your fiscal strength, because now we're sitting with a debt to GDP ratio that is actually nearing 60%. Zambia's debt to GDP ratio is sitting at 66%, and the IMF is getting ready to intervene. So at this rate, we are going to lose our economic sovereign. So I think we're going to have to understand that whether or not we want to make these tough decisions, if we don't make it ourselves, then unfortunately someone is going to come in and make it for us. So I think, but also, the reason why you have a shareholder and a board and an executive is precisely because all of them play a different role. I think there is something to be said around maybe how the shareholder is actually managing this. I think look at why Pagamani at Eskom, Jahana at SAA, and now Mark Barnes at the South African Post Office, why they gave the reasons that they advanced in terms of stepping down. They needed to be allowed the space to can execute the turnaround strategies that they have to actually implement. The reason why you have corporate governance or governance, as the reason why you have governance is so that you can separate control and ownership. Ownership is with the shareholder, control is with the ownership is with the shareholder, and control is with the management and the board. Exactly. So I think we seem to be actually, and with all these structures at Eskom, we actually seem to be, you don't know where which one starts and which one ends. Who's responsible for what? Who do you hold finally accountable and so forth? Now, how does an executive operate in that environment? It is causing confusion, and if nothing else, it is causing more panic. It is creating an environment of more uncertainty. But unfortunately, to the rest of the world, they are looking and they are saying, clearly these people don't have a plan and they don't know what they are doing. Because if they understood, the role that each has to play, then they were actually going to be more clearer in terms of who's responsible for what.
Absolutely. I see Eric is burning.
I can't resist this because, let's just take Eskom, and to give us all a way forward, I'm making a suggestion to you here. As I said to you, your chairperson, Busisiwe Mavuso, is the chairperson of the Eskom board. There's a business-friendly board of Eskom.
I'm one of them.
Great, okay. There's a paper being produced to be presented to Parliament in 2 weeks' time on how Eskom is going to be salvaged. Same time, you represent top CEOs in this country, and we've got some fantastic business leaders, high-performing, globally competitive businesses in this country that you personally represent, and Jabu. We've got a Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, and a President who've got the same agenda to come out with a turnaround strategy and a debt management strategy for Eskom. So I'm saying to you, I'm suggesting that a constructive role that BLSA, the business community, can play is to put shoulders to the wheel and help that board and help Jabu and Eskom to get its plan together. Just my own initiative, I wrote an email to Jabu earlier this week, and I said, Jabu, I'd like to give input to your turnaround plan, and I was kind of pushed aside, and I forced myself in. Just as I stepped in the studio, I got an email from Eskom to say, tell us if you're available for an interaction on Thursday. So I'm saying I'd like to follow up this meeting with a discussion with you as to how, not only there, but in terms of municipalities, in terms of balancing the budget for the medium-term budget that's going to come up in October, that instead of pushing the ball aside and kicking for touch, we actually play a proactive role as business in getting it right.
I absolutely agree with you. We have to be given the space, and yes, we are willing as business
not
to
given
come
the
in
space, taking the space, making that's you see, that's what I'm being proactive.
So we have to take the space.
Exactly, that's what I'm pushing to you. Sorry, thank you. We're going to follow up.
You're going to have to tell me how to do that, right? I would love to push. You can say I'm a pusher, so I'll push for
with
it
you.
if I
We'll
can.
push together.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
No, but,
Fair point.
But you see, look, there has to be the willing the partner in this instance, government has to be willing to actually give business space, because I hear where they come from, but unfortunately without strategic partnership, because we need more alliances. If business were to have alliance with labor, the chances are government will listen a lot quicker. So those are some of the power dynamics which business find themselves in a predicament, because if business was not standing out like a sore thumb, so to speak, the chances of government listening a lot quicker would be different. That's my take. I'm not sure, I could be completely wrong.
I'm just repeating to you that the chairperson of ESCOM is the same chairperson of Business
BLSA.
Leadership South Africa. Yeah. If you can't pick up the phone to your chairperson and say, I'm offering you the expertise of business to help sort out, that's a brilliant opportunity. I was only one person and I managed to get through. I want to follow up with you, Busi. We need to do this, and problem by problem. That's the role that I think, a concrete role that we can actually take to turn things around. There are people panicking, as you know. We can't have that. We need to build confidence and solutions.
I think, Nimrod, what I'm hearing from Eric is, if you are trying, you are not trying hard enough. Try harder. Claim the space. Don't request to be given take, the space and actually come on board.
On that note, Benjamin's SMS pretty much speaks to what you've just said now. It says, Nimrod, Madame Mavuso is hitting on the nail. She knows exactly what she's talking about. Absolutely correct on the point that we need to address, I think the PP, fiery, keep up the good work from Benjamin. So clearly, we're hitting on the nail. Clearly, listeners out there are cognizant of what the business is actually doing, but perhaps maybe taking, Eric's assertion, if I may put it that way. We need to move with speed. Yeah. We need to address, these issues in a much more pushy way, if so to speak, because the reality is that we no longer have the luxury of time. Absolutely. By the time we wake up, it will be done. Maybe in the next 30 seconds as we're wrapping up, what's your final shot for this conversation and business or business leaders who are listening to the show and saying, how do we support the movement taking the process forward?
Yeah. Look, business remains very committed to ensuring that we see South Africa move forward. I think we have the disproportionate resources, we have the disproportionate voice, we have the disproportionate power, and I think we've come to the realization that unless and until business is actively involved and claiming some of the spaces, to Eric's point, in terms of giving direction and leading some of the discussions and setting the tone, then we're not going to achieve what we want to achieve as a country. Maybe the time has come, to Eric's challenge, that we actually force ourselves into these spaces, because when this thing collapses, it's going to, and when I say thing, I mean the economy. When the economy collapses, it's going to collapse for all of us, and we're going to be the biggest losers as business. Sure. So maybe we shouldn't actually be staying on the periphery and be waiting to be invited, because this too is our gig. So we actually need to be more forceful in terms of how we come on board and assist move the country forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Eric, 30 seconds as we're wrapping up.
Absolutely.
With you there all the way, Busi.
Yeah. Thank
Love
you.
it.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. How I wish we could have more time. And I'm sure Busi would love to come through in the future conversation, because this is how we really shape the narrative of business involvement in economy, not only from the peripheral point of view, but at the core, because it is core business to create an environment that is not only conducive but that thrives. And that note, it's going to have to be, that's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much for listening. Adios.
Great.
Thank you.